Good evening, everyone. My name is Elham Fardod, and I am the CEO and founder of the charity Migrant Leaders. We're here today with Anglo, one of our corporate sponsors of Migrant Leaders, and we have the luck that they will be giving a presentation on communication skills, and will also be telling us about 3 of their employees' career stories, so that you have an opportunity to get some insights and advice and tips. And you can also, as our Migrant Leaders mentees, ask any questions or share any thoughts. So without further ado, I will be passing to Matt, who will be presenting to you on communication skills.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, one of those things after working from home for about 2 years, getting used still to finding the mute button is a struggle, it seems. But thank you. Let me just quickly share my screen. So first off, just want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'll spend a little bit of time just telling you a bit about who I am and what I do. Hopefully you'll find that helpful, useful in some way. But if you don't, then equally I'm open to feedback, so please let me know. So where to begin when it comes to comms, presenting and public speaking? Well, in 1 second, there we go. So I thought it best to kick off just by sharing a little bit about who I am. So who am I? So my name is Matt Grab, and first and foremost, I'm a husband and a father. So I've been married to Victoria, my wife, obviously, as we're married, for about 14 years. I have 3 daughters, Aurelia, Felicia, and Tabitha, and 1 son, Bo, who we recently adopted. In fact, it went through officially at the end of last year after a rather arduous adoption process. We live in the Midlands in England. I work in London for De Beers as head of employee communications and engagement. But as I say, live in Midlands, which is around about 140 miles away from the office. I mentioned there my wife and children. My wife has a Polish background. I say background because she was born in England to Polish parents and thinks of herself as both kind of English and Polish. And our children are bilingual, as being raised by their Polish mamusia, which is the word I learned very quickly. I should say that, as you may have guessed, ja jestem z Anglii, which means that I am English. That's pretty much the extent of my kind of bilingual ability when it comes to Polish, except I should say for the knack of knowing when I'm being spoken about by my daughters and my wife in Polish. For some reason I can pick up on that, and it seems to be often. But why am I telling you this? Because you could argue that what's this got to do with comms, public speaking or presenting? Well, ultimately it's my story, and stories are incredibly important. Particularly when it comes to communications. In terms of who I am, beyond that, I am an avid reader. And again, you may argue, okay, what does that have to do with a professional kind of session on comms, public speaking and presenting? What I'd say is I love to read. So when I say avid reader, I mean I read all the time. If I wasn't speaking with you now, I would probably just be finishing up my working day with a book. I love reading so much so that when first putting my CV together, and you know, you have the kind of the hobbies and interests section on when you first do a CV on any sort of template that you download and you're kind of struggling to put a CV together, that hobbies and interests kind of section, which I always struggled with. And I would often put in reading because I genuinely did, and do love reading. Still feels like a bit of a cop-out though. It's almost like watching movies. It doesn't really kind of say much about you, but for me, I mean, I absolutely love it. Not only do I love reading, but there's a practical point to it when it comes to the role I have. If you want to be an effective communicator, I found, you have to read. You have to read anything and everything. It helps to broaden your understanding of language, of narrative, of character development. And this goes for any comms medium. You could be working in external communications, you could be working in internal communications, as I do. You could be working in anything and everything. You could be writing novels. Read. Just any opportunity to read anything is going to be helpful. The reason being that our minds are like sponges. I'm not a doctor at all, but I know enough from the reading to know that we absorb we absorb things as we read that will help inform how you present yourself when it comes to your ability to write, to talk, to debate, to present. So I can't guarantee that there are a lot of nuggets of wisdom in this at all in this presentation, but if there's any advice, that the first piece of advice I'd say is read. So read anything and read often. The final point, just to make in terms of who I am, is I am an introvert, which you may have already guessed. Now, it doesn't provide any insight into comms, public speaking, or presenting. But what it does tell you is that I am not accustomed to to speaking to large groups of people. As an introvert, I tend to kind of keep my thoughts to myself and kick things around and go to my kind of known kind of colleagues to bounce ideas off of. But we can only grow and develop, particularly in the communication space, again, whichever discipline it happens to be, if we learn to get comfortable with those feelings of discomfort, I would say. And for me, it's around kind of putting myself out there, being much more of an extrovert in my kind of working life than it is in my home life. So I'm very much an introvert. But equally, why am I telling you this? Again, I would hope that you see that this kind of makes me in some way, shape, or form somewhat vulnerable. You probably guessed already that I'm not kind of accustomed to speaking to large groups of people, but unfortunately, you could argue, or fortunately, it's a part of my my day job, and I need to, as I've said, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and that's something which I would say everybody needs to as they kind of develop in the space of communications. I should say that vulnerability is an incredibly powerful hook for a story, and you probably don't need me to tell you, but people and the stories they have to tell are crucial, are so important, particularly today, all around the world. Everybody has a story to tell, and I can say without a doubt, everybody's got an interesting story to tell that someone else wants to hear about or read about. And stories have been important for millennia. I mean, way back when people were living in caves, storytelling was kind of the currency, was the way to gather people and to bond. And I would go as far to say that storytelling is very much the new currency. But in order to tell stories, you've got to be comfortable sharing your story. And again, just to be vulnerable with you all here, it's not something I'm accustomed to, speaking to a lot of people, but I'm keen that you hopefully glean something from today. So what do I do? Well, I work for a company called De Beers, as I mentioned. I've been with De Beers now for a little over 8 years. De Beers is a diamond company. We recover rough diamonds from 4 countries around the world. That's South Africa, Botswana, Namibia, and Canada. We sell these rough diamonds all around the world. We also sell diamond jewelry as well. De Beers is owned by Anglo and the Republic of Botswana, the Southern African nation. I would say that as I've been at De Beers for 8 years, the majority of my time has been on the external communications side, working within media relations and digital communications, focused on our, at the time, kind of fledgling approach to social media, which is its whole other bag that needs to be explored. But I have worked in corporate affairs and communication roles for more than 20 years, I would say, which still surprises me because it doesn't feel that long ago. I actually started working in comms when I was in secondary school. So I did some work experience in a communications consultancy company, and I was, as a number of my kind of peers in the school, where we were given companies to go to do some work experience, and I was sent to a nearby communications consultancy company, who I should say I later asked for a job. I enjoyed it that much after 2 weeks. But again, another example of me, even at that age of 14, 15, being incredibly introverted, doing something that pushed me out of my comfort zone, but to kind of great success, I would argue, now, in terms of having found my kind of path when it comes to my career. In terms of the work I did, and I know this is touching a little bit on the career stories, but I think it's kind of worth covering. At that stage, as I say, 14, 15 years old, working in a communications consultancy, I wasn't given publications to work on, to write, to design. No, I was asked to make tea, which I got very good at. I sent faxes, which were still a thing, even 20 or so years ago. I photocopied as well, still a thing then. Basically, the busy work to keep someone who had been basically plopped onto a company for 2 weeks to actually try and support in some way. But it's how I learned, believe it or not. And it's how I absorbed, back to that sponge comment I made earlier. And what I would say here is that if you can surround yourself with people who know what they're doing, who ideally are passionate about what they're doing, in those early stages, in those kind of formative years, when you're trying to find a path for yourself, you're trying to learn and develop, this kind of osmosis absorption effect will happen. And I would say that for me, it became the bedrock, the foundation, if you like, of the career that I now have. I can't imagine doing anything else than what I'm doing now, working in communications. And it's something that I find incredibly fulfilling and I'm passionate about, and I'll come on to in a bit more detail in a second. Now, a lot of what I did learn when I eventually worked at that company was around writing. So I mentioned that I like reading. Reading is incredibly important. So I would say is writing, particularly if you want to develop your core skills as a communicator. And again, it doesn't have to be within any particular discipline. But if you want to work in communications, if you want to become a better communicator, even if you don't want to work in the discipline, then just to be able to have effective conversations to make your point, writing, just like reading, is so important. So second piece of advice, take it or leave it, is write daily, anything and everything. Write in doodle if you need to, keep a journal, but write daily. I happen to have in every kind of room of the house a notebook, much to my wife's annoyance, thinking they can just kind of be stuck in a cupboard somewhere and kind of just keep them in one room. I tend to leave a notebook in every room just because it's easy this day and age to kind of jot things down on the phone, but we're losing something with that. And for me, that's about kind of getting the idea to paper. It struggles sometimes if you're doing it with your thumbs. So if you have the opportunity, take it, write anything, whatever you can, make notes. It's just going to help you as you build those foundations as an effective communicator. And you'll see there, I write. I clearly don't keep time with my PowerPoint slides. The second thing, as you probably guessed, is I talk. And perhaps you may well be thinking now, not so well. I talk fast, I often mumble, and again, you're probably questioning, why have we joined a session here where it's about public speaking, partly. We have somebody who's admitting to talking too fast and mumbling a lot. I think it's fair to say, as I've laboured probably too much already, favour the written word over discussion. Again, see that earlier introvert point that I made. But a lot of what it means to be an effective communicator is to ultimately centre on your ability to debate and discuss, to encourage an alternative perspective for things, to fight your corner in some cases. So as uncomfortable as I may find it, I continue to put myself in situations where I have that opportunity. And again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to do so today, because it's making me a better communicator. Again, you may feel otherwise, but I can tell you it is. In terms of the final point, I would just say on this piece here, I make mistakes. Mistakes or missteps, call them what you will. I make them on an almost daily basis, but I firmly believe this is how we learn. It's certainly how I learn now. It wasn't always the case. I used to sit with these concerns. I'd get critiques or negative feedback, and I would, long after it's probably been forgotten by the person who provided it, I'd still be kind of chewing it over in my mind. What has changed for me over the years is that there's a piece of advice, I forget the individual who shared it, but the advice was that mistakes or failure shouldn't be viewed as such. Mistakes or failure is simply success training. It's what you need to do in order to succeed in life. So whenever I make mistakes now, it truly is an opportunity to learn. And that's another piece of advice that I would share. Don't sweat the small stuff. Don't dwell on the mistakes or the failure. Learn from them. Take what you can from them. Every mistake, every failure is an opportunity to learn. It's success training. Don't let them eat you up. I, as I say, have sat with them for far too long after I've closed the laptop down, long after the work has been done, they have still sat with me. Interestingly, a lot longer than positive comments and positive feedback do, which again probably says more about me than anything else. But again, these aren't mistakes, it's success training. But why do I do it ultimately? Why do I do the work that I do? I enjoy it, as I mentioned before. It's said that if you can find something to do for a living that you love or enjoy, you'll never work a day in your life. I would maybe just kind of add to that that I really do enjoy what I do, but let's not kid ourselves, it's work, and it's hard work at times. You have to be willing to open yourself up to criticism, as I've just mentioned. That's the nature of a kind of a creator. You're creating something for others to consume in some way, shape, or form. And I've mentioned here about writing and speaking, but it could be creation of any kind. You could be a graphic designer. You could be working on video production. You are creating something, and if there's one certainty aside from, or two certainties aside from death and taxes, the other certainty is that people will have opinions. Today, more than ever, people aren't shy in sharing said opinions. But that's not to say that you need to develop a thick skin to criticism. But you do need to be aware that whatever you're creating, be it I'll give you an example from my kind of career, be it an op-ed for a national newspaper, say in Namibia, that's been read by thousands of people, or an internal message to just 5 people, to maybe a live event that you're arranging, or it's a poster you're designing for a particular audience, or even just for something you're creating for one person. Once it's out there, it's no longer yours, and you need to be ready for your work to be critiqued. But again, that's not to say sit with the criticism, but learn from it, take it and use it to your advantage. It's all a learning opportunity ultimately. But if you enjoy the creation process, as I do, when it comes to the work I do, it does help soften kind of the blow of those criticisms. Why else do I do it? Well, I feel like I make a difference. I really believe I do. I write in my role currently a lot of messages for senior leaders and for our CEO in particular. And often it's about kind of creating a narrative for someone else that they, as I mentioned before, then own. It's their narrative. You're creating it for them. And why I feel that I believe I make a difference in the work I do is that in creating that narrative, that message for somebody, and them then taking it, you can ultimately be informing the actions that someone else will take as a result of what you've created. Either the actions they take, or you could be shifting a viewpoint, you could be helping them form an opinion, and that's incredibly powerful. And that can be done through any medium, as I say. So it could be the written word, it could be the visual medium, it could be anything, it could be just a debate. There's so much power in the ability to communicate. It's incredibly important. I mentioned that I do write a lot for our senior leaders. One of the best feelings in the world, I've come to realize, is when you start to hear them speaking separately beyond anything that you're doing for them, any kind of work you're supporting them with, and they're starting to use vernacular or kind of tones and themes that have come from something you've put to them in a previous piece of work you've done for them. That to me is brilliant. There is also almost kind of like a God complex element here as well, where you're kind of molding somebody into something, but it shows that what you've created previously has resonated so much so that it's become a part of who they are, and that is powerful. Again, communication is incredibly powerful. So look for the difference that you can make in the work that you do, because it does help when it comes to doing the work. And final point on this slide, why do I do it? Well, it pays the bills. My earlier comment about do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, I was perhaps a little bit too flippant there. Life is tough. I think it's only getting tougher with every passing day. You just need to switch on the news to see that. Stories and storytelling is an escape for people. Now, it's easy to say when it comes to storytelling in kind of the outside world, and you may be thinking, well, how is that the case when you work in a corporation or a big business? How is that an escape? Well, it's an opportunity to focus people on another topic. We do it in our business. I mean, it's a lot of what I've had to write in the past has been very much kind of business messaging. There's been room for creativity in there, which is fantastic, but you could argue that maybe some of that content to the audience might be a little bit dry compared to what they're wanting. But there is so much potential, particularly in the business like De Beers, to share the stories of our people across the business that are doing just amazing things around the world. And positioning those stories from those people is incredibly powerful. As I say, stories are a currency. I firmly believe that in this day and age. And podcasting, as another kind of discipline within the comm space, is an amazing example of this. Anybody can create a podcast now. And what I would say is everybody has a story to tell, or one under the surface waiting to be told. And everybody is a content creator. You can pick up your phone and start podcasting now, and there will be an audience. You just need to find it. But everybody has an exciting story to tell. I firmly believe that. I think that if I was able to have time with those of you watching this and on this call and spend 15 minutes, we'd be able to get to the kind of the number of a really interesting story, and there'll be an audience for it. So don't doubt that you have your own stories to tell. And what I'd say is, if you can, find a way to share your stories with the world. But if you can know only three things, know these three things. Know your audience. Whatever it is, the work that you do, if you end up going into a job that does involve communications, be it media relations, public speaking, you could be a speech writer, as I mentioned, you could be a video editor, it could be anything. What you're doing is ultimately for an audience. You're doing it for them. You're creating something for someone else. Often I find that the people that come to me and my team asking for support don't all that often consider the audience, the people they want to actually kind of receive whatever it is they're coming to us for support for. Beyond the kind of, this should probably go to a particular group of people. Rarely do they consider the audience, but I would say ideally it'd be helpful if they did, but really that's our role within, certainly in employee communications. We understand our people. We tend to be the sounding board for our people, and we get to be the echo chamber that fires it back up to others across the business. It's the job of the communicator, the creator, to keep the audience front and center. Now, this might sound a little bit grand, but we, the communicator, the creator, are their champion. We are creating content for them. Nobody wants to create something that's not going to resonate, is not going to have an impact, not going to ideally kind of hit them in the heart and change their opinion, get them to form a different perspective on something. We have that opportunity with what we say and do. And again, it doesn't just apply to the communications discipline. It could be anything you do, a conversation you have with somebody in the street. It's an opportunity there to share a story, to form a bond, to help shape an opinion. So communication, if I haven't kind of over labored the point, is incredibly important. Second thing, know your point. You may be thinking by now, Matt, what is your actual point? I would say it's incredibly easy to write or say something in 100 words that could very easily be written in 20 or 10 words. I've been guilty of this in the past. That feeling of having to ultimately pad out, what you want to say or write, because there's a feeling of, I've got to say more here to get the point across. That's not always the case. As I say, I've been incredibly guilty of this. I mean, take these amazing slides that you're looking at now. I could have spent a lot of time on all singing, all dancing slides, although you'll note that there are some animations here. But what would be the point, unless what I was putting on there was to get a particular point across to you? The point of a PowerPoint deck, and this is something that comes up on a day-to-day basis in my job, is to support the story that you're trying to tell. It's not to tell the story. If we wanted that, then we write something else, stick on a slide and send it to people. Really, it's to help just kind of narrow the focus on the points you want people to focus on. But hopefully, I should say, you've enjoyed my transitions on here. The story, the narrative, the point of what you're trying to say is what people should be interested in, and that should be the focus. And finally, know yourself, especially when pretending to be someone else. Per my earlier point about writing messages for someone else, you should be your harshest critic. Don't be swayed by others. Take what you want from them in terms of opinion and advice. Cherry pick what's useful to you. But ultimately, your harshest critic should always be yourself. You should be the one reflecting on what you create and spending the time to see if it's right and just what you want to, the purpose you want it to serve. There will be those, obviously, you work with that will need to inform a perspective, but stay true to what you believe is the correct way to make your point. Again, even if you are making that point for someone else. And one final piece of practical advice: if creating anything, and this I would say is probably that if you take away anything from today, this is something which I really do believe is incredibly powerful. Anything you create, once you've had a first pass at it, so for me, as I mentioned, it's a lot of writing. Once you've had a first pass at it, put it away. Just whatever that draft looks like, leave it for as long as you realistically can. And I know often that's not always that long, but leave it for as long as you can and then revisit it. Take a look at it with fresh eyes. I promise you it will only get better when you go through and make additional changes. If you can afford the time to let something sit and rest and then revisit, you will only improve upon it. So that's my piece of practical advice. That's the end of my rather simple but hopefully effective slides, but willing to take questions and kind of carry on with the discussion.
Thank you so much, Matt. I certainly found that really insightful and a very different perspective on communications from a self-admitted introvert. So often we get extroverts talking about communications, and it's really, really good to get a different perspective on communication skills. So thank you so much for that. Donnie has put one of our mentees in the chat. What if the issue is that we procrastinate and we sabotage ourselves?
That's a very good question. Thank you, Donnie. So it's easy, particularly if you're faced with a blank page. And I keep coming back to writing because that's what I do a lot of. I firmly believe, per that last point, that procrastination to a point can be effective, but by that I mean create the work and leave it. That's not procrastination in my mind. That's just letting something sit and rest, and it's giving your mind an opportunity to consider additional perspectives that maybe when you are faced with that blank sheet of paper haven't immediately kind of come through. So I do feel that there is time to leave it. And I don't know, Donnie, if this came through, that your question was in relation to the last kind of point there, but I do believe that there is power in leaving something for a piece and revisiting. I find the most challenging aspect of creating anything is that first step. And I'm not the first person to say that the first step is the most difficult, but it is. But once you do that, you find the ball's rolling and you're off. So if there's any advice I can give, it's push yourself to overcome that initial maybe feeling of fear or procrastination, and I promise things do get easier as you progress.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I wonder if you would like to tell any more on your career story before we move to Frederica to tell her career story next.
Yeah, sure, happy to. So as I mentioned in the presentation, I literally did start working. Sorry, my children are back, hence the noise and crying. I can't do much about that, I'm afraid. So I started, as I say, late 90s. In secondary school down south. I ended up doing work experience for this comms agency, and it really was out of character for me to ask them after 2 weeks if they'd take me back for a summer job. Which they did and paid me, which was amazing. So being kind of 15, 16, your summer holidays and actually having money was fantastic. But as I mentioned before, I then learned to do something that I just found incredibly exciting and saw the value in. From then, what I didn't say earlier, but from that point, I actually asked them if they would sponsor me to do an NVQ, so a national vocational qualification in the UK. So work-based training, basically, almost an apprenticeship. Although often apprenticeships are seen in more kind of operational roles, this was very much kind of a corporate sort of desk-based role. And I worked with them for about 3 years and just built up connections, spoke to people, even people that I may not have had much in common with. Spoke to enough people, and it got to the stage where people remembered me. I was helpful, which clearly helps. And I was offered a job with one of the clients that we were working with, a company called Centrica, which is an energy company. In the UK, it owns a company called British Gas, which kind of administers boilers and provides gas and electricity to homes around the UK. I ended up working across a number of different roles in Centrica, all internal communications focused, and it's really there that I started to kind of hone my skills as a communicator, working on things from video production to graphic design to a lot more writing. And then moved over to the external comms, the media relations side, a very different animal, I would say, to internal comms. You have to be much more measured in your response, I would say, when it comes to external matters. Although what I would say, another potential piece of advice, is that if you do end up working in employee communications, there is no such thing as an internal communication. Anything we produce for the business, we have to be confident and happy that if it ever kind of appeared in the outside world, and it often sometimes does, that there's nothing in there that we would be worried about reaching the outside world. But really from Centrica and British Gas, I didn't go to university, I should say. So I did college, I did the MVQ. I didn't go to university. What I did do, even though I didn't go to university, was I took my own gap year, as it were, so a year out. That involved me basically moving away from an office job and working for a local family-run business in my town at the time, where I delivered car parts, so automotive parts for local garages. Very different, very physical, lifting engines, starter motors and things into cars and delivering them to garages to fit into cars that are being repaired. I did that for a year. I enjoyed it, and it was fulfilling in terms of a physical sense. It was fulfilling, but that element I found so kind of exciting about communications and shaping a narrative and developing a story wasn't there for me. I was also at that point, bringing it back to my kind of personal life. I was also thinking of proposing to my then girlfriend, my now wife of 14 years. And the practical nature, and as I said before, the job pays the bills as well. The practical nature of wanting to support my wife and a growing family, it wasn't feasible with the job I was doing. So rather than go looking for any other job, I was keen to get back into communications, and was lucky enough to go back to a similar company to Centrica, called Centrica Energy, focused on offshore oil and gas, and worked there. And it got to the point, and the reason I left that company, and it tends to be the reason whenever I consider leaving a role, it's rarely because of the work. I often enjoy the work. What drives me to leave a job or consider leaving a job, it tends to be the people that I work with. If I don't kind of gel with the people I work with, it's just not enjoyable, if I'm honest with you. And I don't want to turn up doing a job, even if I enjoy the job. If I have to work with people that I just don't get on with, I can't. That's not who I am. That's not my kind of authentic self. I can't force myself to just kind of get by and get on with people. And it kind of got that way at Centrica Energy. And I took the decision to leave. Again, because I've met a lot of people, worked with a lot of people, proved myself to be useful. I certainly hope so. Was offered a job with De Beers from someone who I'd met briefly at Centrica, and went through a rather arduous, lengthy interview process. A number of, I think it was about 3 or 4 interviews. It was over the period of about 6 months. This process went on, and if you already made your mind up that you're going to be leaving a company to join another one, to spend that amount of time just waiting for a process to fulfill can be quite disconcerting, but stuck with it. And yes, joined De Beers at the beginning, or the end of, I should say, 2013, early 2014, and have been there for 8 years. As I say, I joined on, as I mentioned, the media relations side. I kind of created our first, or I should say I overhauled our internet presence and developed our first social media presence for the group, which has gone on to grow and grow, which is fantastic under kind of new kind of ownership, as it were. But my heart's always been in kind of the employee communications space. I firmly believe that employees to a business are a company's most valuable asset, if it's even right to call them an asset. And I would say the most overlooked stakeholder for a company. You've got potentially, for De Beers, for instance, 20,000 ambassadors for your company. To harness that sort of power, to engage with them and to tell their stories is it's a privilege, if I'm honest with you. I took on the employee comms role though at the beginning of 2020. So I had developed quite a lengthy, thorough plan for what I wanted to do in terms of overhauling employee communications when I was told I'd had the job. And feet kind of under the desk come January 2020, start to work on these plans, start positioning what I need to position, and then COVID hit and basically obliterated any plans I had for about 2 years. And I know it's not just me. My colleagues from Anglo American and De Beers will say the same thing. What I found though over the 2 years of COVID is, even though we had to be more remote, physically remote, I got to know people better than I ever would had I been kind of working the way I was working, or intending to work in that role without a pandemic. I mean, if I look at Salima and Diego, for instance, I'll say Diego in particular because of your role in facilities and the work you do dealing with kind of the site and people. I've got to know Diego over the past 2 years, and learned things about Diego that I would have known. Good things, Diego, don't worry. I wouldn't have known had I not had the opportunity to work with him, and to have the opportunity in a time of such kind of darkness for the world to be able to foster new relationships has been a privilege, a true privilege. And so yes, glad that we were coming out of COVID last year, looking to obviously start getting plans back on track, and sadly, conflict in Ukraine is just terrible on so many different levels, but that's the nature, I guess, of what we have to do in comms, is respond to the situation. So that's very much been kind of our focal point of late as an employee comms team, is I guess reassuring our people about what this means, the conflict in Ukraine, what this means, the support we're giving to the people of Ukraine and the situation, and how we can hopefully in our communications try and bring some heart and empathy to the work we do. And again, without wanting to keep hammering home that point, it's about people and storytelling. And yeah, that's why I love what I do.
Thank you so much, Matt. That was wonderful. Thank you for sharing your wholehearted messages with our mentees. We are next going to move to Federica, who will be telling us her career story, please. Welcome.
Thank you, and thank you, Matt. It was very inspiring, your talk. So my name is Federica. I work as a global talent acquisition analyst. Very long title. I'll explain shortly what it is. I'm from Italy, as you can probably hear from the accent. Although I have been very, very lucky to be living in a lot of places around the world since I was 16, 17. So that's awesome. But I've only had my career in the UK. So I studied in Spain. As soon as I graduated, I moved to London, and luckily again landed in the first job in recruitment, where I worked for a recruitment agency for a period of time, for about a year. It was very difficult. It was in the financial world in London, but it was a very good experience. Then I moved to another recruitment agency doing slightly different work, a more senior level executive. And then I had the great opportunity to join De Beers, and De Beers was just an incredible opportunity. And I worked in HR for, I'm getting confused, for 2.5 years, is it? I think for about 2 years. And HR was kind of what I've studied, really, because I had a bachelor in business administration, and then I have a minor, probably you call it like that in the UK, in HR. The thing is, when you're coming out of university, you kind of don't really know what's out there. And so HR, it's really my passion. And within itself, there's so many things. There is talent acquisition, which is what I'm doing now, HR, which is what I did for years, and talent management, looking after career development of employees, and all sorts. So really, I did that job for 2 years. It was really good. And then I actually met Salima, who's in this call, and who works in Anglo American again. And it was awesome because they were telling me about the opportunity of joining a kind of a newly formed team, which is global talent sourcing, and then I joined. I kind of took on this opportunity, and I've been in this role for now 2 years. Great exposure. Like I said, it's a global role. So on a daily basis, I'm working with people in South Africa, to Chile, to Peru, to Australia. Actually, even though I'm based in London, I don't really work with the UK that much. It's much more within other countries, and really supporting our operations, mining operations, with their different kind of talent pipelining and recruitment. And to be honest, I had no idea I would have had this job 5 years ago. It is quite niche, and at the same time, really, really interesting. So if I could give, without talking too much, if I can give anyone on this call a career advice, it would really be kind of be humble and listen and learn. I know it sounds so obvious and such a cliche, learn and learn, but it is true. Like when you start working, when you are in a working environment, there's so many people around you that've got amazing expertise, and if you've got the right attitude and are humble and just are so open to learn, they will teach you, and you'll have, I think, more opportunities, even like learn not necessarily a technical thing, soft skills, probably like Matt has alluded to, even communications skills and all that. It all stems to building a network, and I'm a huge fan of that, and as well discover what's out there. Like I said, there's so many jobs, and I'm in talent acquisition. I know many jobs, but still there's some that I discover every day, and I'm like, oh, I had no idea that existed. But yeah. Me.
Thank you so much, Federica. That was an excellent story, because it was so relatable, and to also hear your passion for what you do and the various related HR roles that you've had, and how passionate you clearly are about Anglo-American. And
yes, I think we all are.
Yeah, it's wonderful to see that about Anglo-American, and also how your career has brought your skills together. It feels quite obvious now that you're in a global role, because you've got language skills, you've worked and lived across different cultures. It really makes sense for you personally as well as professionally. So really congratulations on carving out such a career path.
Thank you. Lot to go.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And we look forward to the story continuing and us hearing more. So we've got Anjali as well on the call, who would kindly tell us about her career story, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anjali. So I'm originally from Sri Lanka. I moved to UK to go to university, and then basically finished uni and said, okay, I need to find a job that gives me a visa that lets me stay. So applied to everything. So the big four, the banks, the consultants, and then ended up at PwC in the accounting track. So I qualified as an accountant at PwC, Then within PwC, I did a secondment to their training and development team. So writing some of the training material and facilitating training sessions. Once that was over, I did that for a year, and then I wanted a different challenge. So I started applying for other jobs and then found the role at De Beers, which is really exciting because I was like, oh, diamonds, that sounds fun. And for me, the more I read about De Beers, the more interested I got. And when they got the interview, got the role, which was really exciting, stayed at De Beers for about 3.5 years in the accounting function, so within financial reporting, looking after Botswanian and South African business units. Then a couple of months ago, I started looking for a new challenge, and I came across the Anglo-American hydrogen truck team. So Anglo-American is building a hydrogen truck to decarbonize the mines, so to tackle climate change. They're the first in the field building this truck. So today we heard the truck moved, which was quite exciting. And I've joined the commercial team within the wider team. So I've been in this team a month. Every day is no idea what I'm doing. We'll figure it out, asking a lot of questions and just kind of, yeah, figuring it out as I go. In terms of kind of my advice, just follow whatever interests you, and then to reiterate what Federica and Matt are saying, be open and listen to everyone. You can learn so much from anyone and everyone. My personal kind of tip is, if you see someone that does something really well, so, or like, oh, that person speaks really well, or you really liked how someone recognized someone else, just make a mental note of it. And then when you're alone, be like, okay, why was that important to me? And is that a skill I want to build? And then you can think about, how do I go about building that skill? I found that quite useful, especially within Anglo. I see these incredible leaders, and I was just like, oh, they do that. How do I learn to do that? And that's definitely, it's a learning progress. But yeah, that would be my kind of advice, as again, quite new and young in my career. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Anjali. That was really exciting to hear, because I could see the exhilaration on your face and in your voice when you talk about the new things to learn, and actually not knowing what the job will bring, and what an exciting prospect it is. So it's a great example of how part of our choices in terms of selecting jobs, careers, and companies is to do with our character and what we find exhilarating. And if someone finds new journeys and ambiguity exhilarating, then that's wonderful. They should be mindful and know themselves so that they go after those jobs. So Salima has put a question in the chat, I believe. I
have, Elam, which might be a slightly weird question, but I do remember this is something that I'm asked all the time, and I'd love to get Matt's, Anjali's and Federica's question. And some of you who are mentees may also be thinking this, is how do you calm your nerves before a presentation or public speaking? Are there any rituals that you go through? Any kind of hints and tips that you could share?
I'm happy to go first if you like. So yeah, you would have heard me kind of mention earlier that I don't particularly gravitate towards public speaking. It's not in my comfort zone, but again, I'm learning to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. One way that I do prepare myself is breathing exercises. It may seem like a fairly straightforward thing, but it's helped me. And really what that involves is kind of the 4-second cycle, as it were, which is breathing in for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds, breathing out for 4 seconds, holding your breath for 4 seconds, and repeating that, I mean, a few times, but as many as you need. I really do find that helps just to calm me before having to do anything, not just public speaking, but anything at all that could be a little bit nerve-wracking.
Thank you so much, Matt. And I'd be happy to share that actually, despite the multiple daily presentations I have to do for migrant leaders in different forums to mentors, mentees, and corporate partners, I actually don't feel naturally comfortable with public speaking, and I have to psych myself up every time and remind myself that I know my subject, that I have prepared, remind myself what are the 2-3 important things that I must front load in my presentation and what I say, because when you feel that those couple of things are the most important, it gives you confidence when you've said the important stuff first. And then that confidence carries through the rest of your talk or presentation. So it's really psyching one up. And the other thing I found, weirdly enough, it seems like a minor thing, but not to have too many coffees before something that you find nervous, because physically coffees can give you palpitations, and too many of them are not helpful in calming your nerves down. Alcohol wouldn't help either, obviously. So never use substances to calm your nerves down. It's not a good idea. I think I recall back to my time as an A-level student. When I look back, I think I had a traumatic experience with something like a presentation, because my A-level economics teacher, who was one of my favorites, Mr. Ridley, last minute asked me to go and do a Janet Jackson song on the stage because someone dropped out, and I should have had the courage to say I can neither perform nor sing, and I couldn't let him down, so I did it. But it was awful, and I knew it. And at the end, one of my friends kind of saved me midway. So that's, I think that traumatic experience unfortunately made me scared of presenting ever since. But luckily enough, in various companies, I had great mentors who then gave me little tips that helped me gain confidence again regarding presentations. So practice makes perfect.
I was going to say, I'd reiterate that it's practice. You just need to get yourself into situations where you have to do it. It's terrifying. I'm still scared of public speaking. One thing I find quite helpful, especially if it's a video conference, is to have a glass of hot water, because when I'm nervous, I kind of get like a little bit shaky and it feels a bit cold. So having that hot water just feels like it's grounding myself almost, and that kind of helps. But when you have to all like stand up and kind of hold yourself up, that also helps.
That's a really good tip, Anjali, actually. A cup of hot water. Well done. Without coffee. Thank you for that.
I love that. Yeah, I completely reiterate what everyone said. I agree. Personally, I have to say that my university was a lot about public speaking. So every time we had to do like an oral exam or presentation, we would have been recorded, number one. Number two, we would have our like the other students rating us. And it was like this since we were 19. So, and it's quite funny because after years, then I re-met my the people that I went to school with. Everyone was super confident talking in public because of this. But it was all about practice, and be conscious of how you speak, and obviously prepare. That's always the best, but not prepare too much, because otherwise you might go like, what am I saying? So just be prepared and practice. I mean, it's absolutely. And something else, an additional tip, and I think is really helpful, is every time if you have a video call, turn on your camera. Don't let it off, because the more you let it off, the more you get used to not having it, especially now in a virtual world like this. It will help you then if it's like a meeting in person, to get used to people seeing you as you talk and see yourself as you talk.
That's a really good tip, Frederica. I think with Generation Z, particularly a lot of them leave their camera off. And of course, they have the kind of right to decide that, but we would encourage them to plan to leave their cameras on or to put their cameras on when they're talking, because it makes a good impression, builds a personal connection, and as you said, it gets them used to seeing themselves talk, which is a good thing. Kind of like in the olden days when we used to practice in front of the mirror.
Exactly. That's it.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much. And I wonder if any of the mentees have any other questions that they would like to ask.
Hello, my name is Heba. I have a question. If that's
Great.
I have a
Thanks,
question.
Heba. Thanks, Heba. Please go ahead.
My question is, just because it got mentioned, I think Matt mentioned it about talking to people and making yourself memorable. How do you network and how do you stand out and make your story memorable to others?
That's a good question, Hiba, and good to meet you, albeit virtually. How do you make yourself memorable and stand out? I'll go back to that point I made around vulnerability. I find that it's a great disarmer for people if you're vulnerable, particularly if you're coming to something, be it this or any other meeting where there's preconceived notions to how it should probably be. You know, we've been doing virtual kind of meetings and calls for 2 years, and you know, I think the ones we do in a professional environment, say like this, are probably very different to the ones we do on FaceTime or WhatsApp with our family. But particularly in this environment, I would say just not being afraid to be yourself. As I mentioned, everybody's got an interesting story to tell. If you can impart some of that with someone so it sticks with them, then that's one way of doing it. Certainly, I tend to start most meetings, probably much to the annoyance of the people I'm meeting with, of either intentionally or sometimes unintentionally cracking a joke or saying something that is very kind of personal or opens me up in some way. And I found over the years that I'm just remembered more for that than other things, and that's I found a kind of a neat way of getting a foot in the door, as it were.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions from our mentees?
I don't have a question so much for the mentee. All I would say is that we've curated some materials over the past year or so around mindful communications, so how to be a better communicator. And I wonder if that's something that you'd be willing to take if I share it with you to pass on to the mentees. So maybe some things in there that they'd find useful. I'm happy to forward on.
Thank you, Matt. Definitely. We will be sending out an email with a link to this webinar's recording, so we can include those resources, especially if they are as links. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. Well done.
Thank you, everyone.
I just wanted to add one kind of small thing. I think if I, like me, thinking back to myself like 10 years ago, it's really hard to imagine like talking to people like back in Sri Lanka, talking to people in an organization, be like, okay, how do I get from here to there? And I think a big thing is believe in yourself, take it step by step, and just be like, you've got this. Like you have to be your biggest cheerleader. And genuinely, like when I was 18, I would never have thought I would leave Sri Lanka, let alone be in a different country living by myself. So you got this. That's the only kind of message I wanted to say.
It's interesting, Anjali, how that method works even when you don't believe it. So the positive words work their positive effect, even if deep down you don't believe it yet. It's incredible, the power of the voice in our heads. I totally relate to what you just said. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much. So I wonder if anyone else has got any other questions or comments before we close this meeting on time.
I'll probably just add one more thing to what Anjali has said, is probably to build the resilience is an incredible tool, especially because you're going to meet different people. You're going to go through different changes, and you realize then that people are different from you, as well as it sounds very obvious, but resilience is something that I think is an important skills that you develop throughout the years, and be able to resist change and don't give up, because the world, it is hard. Matt said it is right. Even though you do what you love, you can clearly all love what we do, but it's hard work. It's not easy, and it takes time, and it takes that little resilience from you.
Thank you so much, Federica. And I think resilience is partly linked to empathy and flexibility, because when we have flexibility, flexible thinking, and empathy for ourselves, we develop that empathy and flexibility towards others. When we are kinder to others, we're kinder to ourselves, and therefore more resilient, because not everything goes our way every time, right? Exactly. We can't control everything. So accepting that makes us more resilient.
Correct. And be kind to yourself. That's a huge one. I think especially women, we tend not to be very kind to ourselves, and especially when we're younger, and especially looking at social media and you're like, oh my God, look at this person, what are they doing? What am I doing? They'll get there, but just be kind, and keep on going.
Absolutely. And we are really, really grateful to you guys at De Beers and Anglo American for everything that you do for our migrant leaders mentees. Thank you for devoting so much preparation to this webinar and giving up your evening for us. Thank you, and we will be publishing this and continuing our Anglo-American webinar series for our mentees. I can't thank you enough, Diego, Salima, and Angeli, Federica, and Matt on this call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Everyone,
Thank you.
thanks, guys.
Pleasure.